Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. I'm your host, Jesse Morris. In each episode, we take a look at the different areas that affect change and drive revenue across your organization. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episode. Here's the revolution. Welcome to another day of the revolution. I'm your host, Jesse Morris. Today, we are lucky to have one of my colleagues and friends, Sylvia Price. Sylvia, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much.
So Sylvia currently leads a business application and systems team in the SaaS space and has done so for a number of years. She and I have worked together at two different companies now, and she's the best leader I've ever seen in this space. I always say she's the calm in the storm, and she has had to solve like some of the biggest challenges surrounding quote to cash, which those of you who actually get into the details of quote to cash and all the different things, you understand how hard that is. So thanks again for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Just a little quick overview. I've worked in and around enterprise software for over 20 years now. Started in business consulting, migrated into different functions, primarily supporting sales like pre-sales, sales ops, and systems like I do today. Always been interested and motivated by big transformation projects and the combination that they require with people, process, and technology, right? It's about driving change, driving business value. That's just super motivating to me. What's a little ironic is that my roots are actually started off as an industrial engineer in manufacturing. But when I think about it, it's, the marriage of process and technology in manufacturing. And what I've done in my career is I ended up, shifting industries. And it's really that marriage of process and technology for SaaS companies now. So that's what I've been up to for the last few years.
That's awesome. And it's fun. I think, you have had like the privilege of working in both small and large space within technology, which is interesting because I think a lot of people tend to either stay in kind of like, the really giant enterprise or really love the startup area. And you've actually been able to morph across both of them. Like when you have done that, like when you think about your startup experiences, you obviously right now you're working at a little bit smaller company, but you've worked anything as large as SAP and everything in between. Like what are some of the common challenges you've seen across those different orgs and some of the keys for growing a good go-to-market motion?
Yeah, sure. And just so, just to level set, I started out really in the largest of the companies and then have gotten into the smaller and startup sector as I've progressed, and I just enjoy the nimbleness of that. But a large company like SAP is a great learning ground in many, many things. So, but there are always common challenges. And I think the most common challenge, which may never actually go away fully, is that the need for reliable quality data. It's like the heart of a go-to-market organization. Large, small, doesn't matter. Everyone can struggle with it. Some have reined it in quite a bit. Others, it's daily, and it's hopefully not in all of those areas. But it is addressable, like I said. But I don't know if anybody ever fully gets it, so they feel like it's 100% where they want it. Some of those areas they require really process definition and rigor to drive the data, like forecasting, opportunity management. Some require more policy and governance, like data duplication issues with accounts, contacts, et cetera. And then some of the areas, I think, they require systems that are architected to deliver the data and the metrics, like pricing and discounting in particular. But all of these areas really do require that alignment between the desired data and the source systems, for sure. The systems underlie it all. We know that. But I just wanted to point out also that, process and policy and definition are really important to driving good data.
It's interesting.
I think you asked about.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that.
I was gonna say it's interesting that you touched on definition, because I think definition is the thing that is probably, like, weirdly enough, one of the hardest things to get, because it's A, not a lot of fun to drive towards, and B, like, I don't know why, but people just have a harder time agreeing and landing on it. So it's interesting, but I agree with you. It is really fundamental to, when you tie those together, the systems, processes, and definition, all towards driving insights. Obviously, that's a big piece of it.
And it evolves, right? Because it'll evolve with the complexity of your solution, the complexity of your processes. I'm thinking very simplistically right now, but if you're a small startup and what you define an account record as, that's going to change, as you grow, and then you're going to have different types of account records, and you're going to want to, define them in different ways, or make it more restrictive of what what an account is. You know, I mentioned metrics briefly, but that's a huge driver of the data that you do need. And I'm emphasizing the data a lot in go-to-market organization because it is the value ultimately that, like a RevOps team or what have you is going to deliver back to that go-to-market organization. In terms of like growing a go-to-market organization, which is a really fun challenge to have. Um, I don't think it starts with systems or data. I think it starts with people and process, to be able to scale it. Everyone singing off that same sheet of music, and that common set of expectations and accountability really, I think, makes a RevOps and a go-to-market organization, really start just saying, reps need to understand, obviously, how to position value, build pipeline, close business. The first line managers, they need to understand how to coach and hold reps accountable. That's where that accountability comes in. And then, RevOps supports all of that with really clear processes, with that data, with that information and the insights off of that. And, I mentioned accountability. I think, expectations and accountability are really important, but, definitely not in a punitive way. It's really because sales is an action-oriented sport, right? You're either building pipeline, developing opportunities, closing deals. So you have to be accountable that you're doing all the right things along the way.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think
Um,
the accountability thing, you're right. It's not punitive, but it is something that, it it at least keeps consistency across the sales org, right? That kind of competitive nature, driving towards outcomes, and getting alignment, right, towards what are we working towards, which is huge. So it makes a lot of sense. Talk like a little bit about, your. Oh, sorry. Did you have something else?
no, go right ahead.
So when you're thinking about your systems team and organization, what are some of those key roles that you look to hire for, and what is some of the talent or things you're looking for when hiring for those key roles?
Sure. Uh, Definitely a key role that's important that I've had in my teams is a technical lead or an architect. Ideally that person is a strong listener and communicator, as well as being really, really strong technically. I think my background's, I come to systems from a business background. Even though I've been on implementations for a big part of my career. I've managed solutions, but I didn't come up as a developer. So for me, in my role, it's great to have that partner on my team that's that technical lead or architect. But they're a rare breed. Um, it's not just about really understanding the system and the architecture, but like I said, that ability to ideally be a strong communicator, listener, because they need to advocate, for the right solutions and decisions. Um, you know, that can't all just fall on my role. So that's definitely something I look for. I also like to have system admins with varying levels of not only experience but perspectives. That come at it from having different areas of concentration. So there's opportunity for cross learning, but opportunity for development as well. It's something I think we all know about teams. The more diversity you have on a team, the stronger it is. So I think of it in terms of the admin skills as well. And of course, business analysts are also really important. In some environments I've worked in, they've been part of my team, and others, they've been key resources in the RevOps team that have had that function. So I think there's flexibility there, but that those great people who can understand the business are really motivated and really love the system side, but they're not the developer side of things that they can help with that translation. It's the perfect link between the two worlds. So nothing revolutionary there. I mean, I think those are the basic building blocks, but I think they're really, really important. There's other qualities that I look for in those roles. I think it's really important to have a familiarity or a level of understanding of the business roles that we support. I've met some admins along the way that are just phenomenal. Like they, it's like they knew the business better than other people in the business. Because they knew how the systems work. They knew the processes, the business processes, the why behind it, how the users were interacting with the system to get it to do what it needed to do. Where the process deviations were. They understood so much about it. But understanding your internal customers is absolutely crucial. So being familiar, especially if you're supporting a sales or go to market function, just having familiarity with those roles, what their challenges are, what they're trying to accomplish on a day to day is really important. And then, of course, problem solving skills. That's what we do. But that ability to balance, hear what the business wants and architect something that's going to accomplish the business goal, but be practical from a systems point of view, making sure the solution can scale, not produce technical debt over time, but still meet their requirements. So that's that balancing act is really, really important, and not everybody can do that. Sometimes technical folks can go down rabbit holes and saying, "Oh, the system can do this and it can do that." The question becomes, well, should it? Is that really practical right now, and is that really where we should be focusing on, or should if we did A, B, and C, I think that would deliver the business value, and we don't need to build something larger than that. And then, of course, if we're building a team, you got to look for a cultural fit. I'm a very team first person. It's not about the individual, it's about the team. I think these types of roles in systems teams typically don't attract people who are they're not necessarily looking for the personal glory. That they really they take a lot of motivation and a sense of accomplishment in what they build, which is great. So making sure we're leveraging that, and it's it's the right thing for the company. It's the right thing for means it's the right thing for us to do. It's not about us; it's about the greater good. That teaming aspect is what I really look for in folks as I'm hiring as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. The mix you talk about is so key of the varying perspectives, and also I think you got a lot of individuals you can find that are very technical but don't understand the business side, or just want to geek out on going down paths. And I think especially more in the startup side, we oftentimes don't get a lot of time on things, and so it's the balancing act of, like I always say, it's the balancing act of what does perfection or what does really good look like, and what is good enough, because a lot of times we only get time for good enough.
Absolutely,
Well,
yeah, and that the inclination, and sometimes it's the inclination from the business, but I'm always on the lookout for are we re-engineering or are we over-engineering something? I should say, we if it's a new process, and you were mentioning, I really love like new big transformation projects, but you don't know what you don't know sometimes, and so you have to be practical and about where you start, um, solve for that, understand what could change over time, build scalable solutions so you can accommodate that growth or those changes. You don't want to get locked into some decisions way too early on. Um, but just because the system can do, or we think this is the way things are going to go, those are, when I hear those words, I'm always like little warning flags, and I want to be pragmatic and do the right thing for that phase, and then grow with it. But yeah, it's always easy to geek out and over engineer. And like I said, sometimes it's on the business. They think, oh, I need, I need all this functionality, and I need, it's like, well, what do you need to get started? And then let's see how things go.
Yeah, it's like we can always add to it, right? There's this idea of it's the iterative,
Yeah.
right? It's the iterative development. So that makes a lot of sense.
Well said. It's let's iterate together, and not think that we're going to build the Taj Mahal, right out of the gate.
Yep, that's exactly it. One of the things I'd love to dig into before we get, we're gonna spend a fair amount of time in quote to cash because I know you've got a lot of experience and I know it's an area that a lot of people struggle. But before we go there, I'd really like to talk a little bit about, like, you've held a lot of positions in your career. What do you enjoy about running a systems org? What do you think it takes to be successful?
Gosh, well, I'm a big believer in enterprise software, as we've described. I've worked in it for a long, long time now. And I genuinely enjoy the aspect of how software helps a company, it helps individuals, and I think it brings a lot of exciting, there's exciting challenges that we're faced with, and bringing new business models to life, redesigning areas that are maybe pain points for the business for a long time. So those types of challenges that we experience as a systems organization I really, really enjoy that. Making the new possible. I'm very passionate about the sales process in general. I mentioned I have an industrial engineering background, and I'm trained in process anyway. But when I got into consulting, and then I saw what software sales look like, I was fascinated by the sales process. I still am. It's like the ultimate process to me. So being able to streamline a sales process so sellers can sell more, and they're bogged down less, and then the business has better information about that, is just really, really motivating me. Those are all the things that I really like about it. Systems add so much value. There's absolutely no question to it. But at this stage in my career, I'm really enjoying being able to take the lessons learned over the years and along the way, all the good, the bad, the ugly, and applying them to our team, and sharing with them. And hopefully they can take some of those lessons along with them going forward. But that's one of the aspects right now that I'm enjoying, is saying, like, it's not like I know everything. I certainly don't. But I've seen pitfalls, and if I can help us out by pointing out, or having us think through some of those potential pitfalls now, hopefully those are lessons learned that the team can take with them as they move their careers forward. And I generally do enjoy the coaching and mentoring that goes along with that, for sure. I mean, my priority, I want my team members to succeed however they want to succeed, and that's working with them every day is extremely motivating to me. So those are just some of my points about what I love about it. I love the value we deliver, and I really just love the people as well.
And I think it's something that you are especially good at. Like, you've got a really good way of which I think the kind of the mentorship coaching side of it. And I think also helping people see perspective, but doing it in a way that is not, I hate to say it, belittling or anything like that, but doing it in a way that's like, hey, have you thought about it this way? And I think that's I always call it like one of your magic giftings, is your ability to help people see other perspectives and come alongside of it, versus it feel like, you're forcefully telling them this is how it is. And I think that's something that, yeah, it's something that you've got a unique skill set behind, which is awesome.
Well, thanks. But there are some times I had something come up even today, and I said, well, the business thinks that this would be, and I said, no, there's no way we're doing that. But I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
There's good reasons why. And the person on my team said, it didn't seem right to me either. But it's like, yeah, but that's okay. We can give the business a hard no, but like we'll still deliver on what they need, but we just have to be careful about how we do it. This part of, as I've been mentioning a couple of times, just being pragmatic about the solutions and how we go about it. Not only can the business sometimes want some things that would be over engineered, but I would say we have the responsibility of being stewards of the systems, good stewards of the system, so that they're scalable and they're maintainable, and we're not building a lot of tech debt and all of that. So we have to. That's part of that balancing act. But yeah, so I can say no, but I'm saying no, but I'll give the reason why, and share that, and I would share that with anybody. We can talk a little bit. Also about some of the soft skills that are needed, I think, in this role, but like, listening, communication, transparency, those are all really, really important as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was interviewing a candidate today for, the same role that you have. And I was telling them, they were asking me like, what do I think is most important? Is it more technical or business acumen? And I actually said, I actually think it's the soft skills that are the most important for your role, because I think, don't get me wrong, you have to have those other things. You have to understand, high level technical architecture. You got to understand how the business works and know what questions to ask. But I think those soft skills, like that's the thing that it's change management, if you kind of boil it down, right? Because at the end of the day, how do you get people to understand and buy in and come along in the process? And I think exactly what you said today, where it's like sometimes we have to say no, that's part of our job. But how do we do it in a way that helps the business see why and how this is going to help longer term, and also come back with okay, hey, we might not be able to get you 100% of what you want, but let's boil down to the heart of what you're trying to achieve here. And is there another way we can get maybe 85, 95% of the way, in a way that A is, gets out there fairly quickly, but B is also not going to hurt us long term as we go to scale and change things going forward.
Totally agree. Yeah. The stakeholder management piece can be huge, right? You've got to, so I stress the listening part. Um, I'm sure a lot of listeners would agree. If once you feel heard, if you're a stakeholder, then I think you're much more open to the collaboration, and it really should be a collaboration, right? And I also, coach the team, you know, in listening. Sometimes there's people who want to vent, right? There's users, and sometimes they're they might be an end user, line level person, or they might be someone of a managerial aspect, but let them vent, right? You want to listen to them, because there's almost always nuggets of gold that are in there, right? I mean, they may be emoting, it's emotional for them, but if they have legitimate frustrations, you need to know that, right? And so, just listen. Don't take it personally. Don't get defensive. Don't try to come back, well, we're doing the best we can, or we didn't have any notice, or just take it. And it's one of the challenges of being in a peer support organization like we are. Sometimes I talk with the team, and I've had to learn this too over the years. We're not the internal customer of anyone. We're it, right? Everyone is our internal customer. So we just have to, that's just a fact of life. So we're here to help them. That's our remit, and do the right thing, right, for the company. So let them vent. There's usually, like I said, there's interesting things to be gleaned out of them venting. They get it off their chest. One of the things I've learned is to respect the people sometimes who do the venting, because they're passionate about it. Why are they emotional? Because they care, right? And they care, and they'll see things that people who don't care as much will miss, right? So there's, like I said, there's nuggets of gold in those folks. Work with them; they'll become your best stakeholders over time if you really do work with them and collaborate. And then you can, like I said, when you're collaborating, you can bring them along on that journey designing the new solution, you can actually say, well, like to do this or this, but here are the challenges that I face, and they'll listen to you, but they're probably only going to listen to you once you've listened to them.
It's interesting you say that, because I think even about some of our our interactions and working over the years together, and even when I think back about some of our biggest headwind people that are kind of the loudest voices and potentially the most challenging at the beginning, those to your point, if you listen and generally those people turn into be your biggest supporters and biggest cheerleaders in the long term. And so it's an interesting, it's fascinating when you say that, because there is like kind of a light bulb moment for me of this. When I think back on some of these people that man, at the beginning, I remember just like getting off calls and going, oh my gosh, like that exhausted me. And then later, when I heard that person tell the rest of the org how phenomenal something we did was, I don't know. There's something that can be that voice of helping you with change management over the long term. So it's an interesting thing to see. It's like almost like you put that investment on the front end most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it can pay dividends in the long run.
Yep, and it's just the right thing to do. When you're in a role like ours, that's what you need to do. You need to, like I said, you just need to listen, and then when you communicate back, be the calm voice, be the collaborative voice, be the understanding voice. I mean, I get it; it's not always easy, but I feel like I think that's helped me be successful in these roles. The more you're able to do that, the better. And I'll say I love winning over a difficult customer. I like that. I do like that challenge. But like I said, they're emotional because they care, and that they're almost everyone comes from has. I met a consultant once that said, a communication consultant that said, assume positive intent. And those words have stuck with me for a long time, because it's very, very true. Most people don't have a bad intent. They really do have a positive intent to them. And, the people who care are the ones who are going to voice it the loudest.
Very true. Very true. All right. I want to dig into one of our favorite topics, one that you and I have spent an inordinate amount of hours of our careers talking through, especially you and I together, but quote to cash. And it's the one that I think it's a big term. It means a lot of different things. And I was explaining to somebody even today about, some of the initiatives we're working on right now, and just breaking down all the pieces that kind of roll up to quote to cash. And it can actually be a little overwhelming. But I want to hit on this because you have so much experience with it. I think you and I would both agree that it's one of those that I don't know if you fully, it varies from every company, and B, every time I've done it, and I'm sure for you, there's like, that's an interesting way to do that. It's almost like, I don't know if you ever get to this point where you're like, here's the perfect architecture of how to solve quote to cash. It feels like one of those like, evergreen opportunities to continuously improve and see new ways of doing things. But at the same time, obviously, there's some fundamentals that it ties into. So, can you walk us through today, like some of those kind of fundamental pieces of quote to cash, and where you think some of the biggest challenges and pitfalls that you've seen in trying to solve that exist?
Sure. Yep. You're spot on. It sounds basic, right? Like, oh, you start with the quote, but then you think, well, to quote something, what's needed, right? So I think and someone could probably come up with a different starting point, but for me, it actually starts with the product portfolio. Because what are we selling? What are the products on the quote, and how are they structured? Do you have a defined product hierarchy or not? Is that important to you? Maybe not. But understanding what is sold with what is very, very important, especially if you're going to automate, parts of quote to cash. So you might know what the products are, but then you've got pricing and different pricing models, and what pricing models make sense in your market. What don't? What are adding unnecessary complexity? Like, it might sound great to price a product a certain way, but Understand also, understand the technology you have. What if you're using CPQ, you know, there's lots of different CPQ tools out there, and what can it do, what can't it do, and I'm typically not a fan of making a tool do unnatural acts when you don't really have to. So understanding the parameters you're working within, you want to meet the business objective, right? You want to price it in a fair and attractive way for the marketplace. But what does that mean with the tools that you have? And there's various pricing models. There's a lot that's out there for that. Something that sometimes is overlooked, surprisingly, because it sounds so obvious, are really understanding the variance in selling motions. I think again, this gets back to we're still at the quoting kind of piece here, but it's how everything flows through from that. So, are you going to have different selling motions for SMB versus enterprise? Are you direct? Do you do some direct, some partner? Do you do any distribution? Those are just there could be a myriad of different types of selling motions that you have. One of the things that I think sometimes it doesn't get the attention it needs is new business versus renewals. It's easier to design a process to sell something new. And this gets back to a key challenge. My caution would be, don't wait and thinking like, well, that won't renew for a year. We'll figure that out. No. You want to start off with knowing when you launch a new product or set of services, what have you, are we renewing? How are we renewing? What are the renewal rules? Do that up front so you can build that in up front. So, and then there's just obviously different for the reps. There's different selling motions in new business versus renewals. So understanding what that needs to look like. Then you get into, I guess, continue on the pricing side. You got discounts and policies around that. What types of discounts? When do we offer them? When don't we? What's discretionary? What's not? Those have to be considered. And then you've got everything to do with, part of the selling motion might end up being, different terms, or how are we accounting for revenue? What are the different payment models? If we're doing multi-year, is it multi-year paid up front? Is it annually? Do we have, and then there can be variations on that theme as well. Is it quarterly billing? Is it, and how do we want all of that to flow? In here, if there's going to be cash, eventually you're going to have provisioning, right? So how does all of this information flow into provisioning, contract management, and of course then the billing and the AR side? I've seen a few examples I've experienced that where CPQ and billing were not architected to enable real world scenarios. So for example, implementation of CPQ where the product models, the bundles in CPQ were built by the product organization, since this gives that product portfolio piece of it. And it made sense, and there was a lot of complexity there, but it all worked great, except we deployed and we went live, and turned out that wasn't the way we sold. Well, that's a shame. We weren't able to really leverage a lot of the scale that CPQ could provide, because we needed to sell, and ultimately you need to sell. You can't, you need to sell what the customer needs and not a theoretical model, right? So like I've seen that disconnect. So that starts with the selling motions, or CPQ and the billing not architected to work well together. I've seen environments where, to create an invoice, you need an opportunity. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter if the real opportunity closed 2 years ago, we got to invoice them for year 3. So here's another opportunity. Or even worse yet, we're going to do some monthly billing, and we need to, we're going to have a way to auto generate these opportunities for these small amounts monthly so it can create an invoice. That's not the arc. That's not a marriage of the selling motion guiding the end to end from quote to cash at all, right? You're creating bad data. It's necessary. I get it for the invoice piece of it, but it doesn't have to be that way, because no one would knowingly architect a system that would have you create an opportunity every month for $1.85 just so you can get an invoice out the door. There's better ways to do it. So there's gaps like that. I think are I've seen in quote to cash. So just concentrating on that, on the real world end to end. Not only like the real world of what we sell, but the how we sell it, payment terms, how do we want to bill it, what does the billing and the invoice look like as well, how does that marry up through that. The end to end is just so important. And I've already talked about the whole omission of renewals. When that does happen, well, and if you're ever going to try and rectify that, um, something to keep in mind. The other challenge I've seen with quote to cash is if you're either implementing a new system or you're merging systems because of acquisitions or what have you, is the data migration of. Again, I think of renewals all the time because I think it's the hardest part of quote to cash to get right. It doesn't have to be, and when if you've got a good system architected for it, it actually works really well. But you need the good source data for renewals to work, right? So you need good contract data that's formatted in a way that's going to be processed by the new system or what have you. It needs to be complete. You need in the SaaS world, you need all the subscription information or the install base if you're working in a different industry or what have you. All of that has to be accurate. The entitlements of that customer's contract, it's all got to be there to be able to leverage a renewal process. Data migration, especially of contracts, install base subscriptions, I've seen it go not well, unsuccessfully, and I've seen it go successfully. So it can be done, but it requires a lot of attention to detail and testing to go through. And it's painstaking work, and I admire the people who do a good job of that. The last time I experienced it, we worked with a team that was phenomenal, and I just can't say how much I respect that work. So anyway, I think those are some of the. Quote to cash is incredibly important. Obviously, I don't think I. You know what, Jesse? I don't think I touched on the revenue and the revenue metrics enough. Probably because another phenomenon that you may see at different companies is determining what's going to be the system of record or the source system for different metrics. So sometimes, when companies are really small, they rely on their CRM system to be that, right? We sold it. Here it is. Here's the data, right? And then the finance system might just, be more AP, AR, et cetera. I've also worked in worlds where, the finance system was the system of record for revenue, and associated metrics, and CRM was just for, pure mainstream CRM. Neither is right or wrong. I've evolved in my thinking of that over time. Neither is right or wrong. I understand it, in the growth trajectory of companies, how that interplays, but do keep in mind, there's work to be done to make revenue metrics tailored to a company if they're depending on what you're looking at measuring. If you're going to use CRM for that, so it absolutely can be done. It can be done reliably. It requires a lot of effort, but again, it's knowing that stuff up front in your design and picking it, and not leaving the metrics to go like, oh, didn't think of that. Now we got to, we got to engineer that through what we've already built. You can build it in, much better. I mean, of course, I'm talking probably nirvana and perfect case if you have all this mapped out. But I'm also a big proponent of, if you can, spend the time to define up front, to a point, because I don't want to over engineer. But at least touch on all these different areas. Ask the questions so that you can design it better in. But yeah, those are some of my cautionary tales for certainly CPQ to billing, and the mapping of that end to end. Really, really important. The selling motions, prioritizing renewals as a focal point. Do it early and often. Yeah, and if you are migrating data, do it, but do it eyes wide open. Don't scrimp on the attention to detail with that, for sure.
Yeah, it's the data migration piece is the thing I think that I mentally block out when I'm thinking through projects. I'm joking a little bit here, but it's so, the rest of it to me is pretty fun, and I like solving data problems, but the data migration, just sometimes it feels like, you're about to solve it, and then you find three other examples of why this is another, edge case scenario. It's always the edge case scenarios that gets us. And so it is interesting because it's the one I think that even I, as a data geek, I underestimated a lot. I was talking to somebody about that this week, and it's the thing that, again, I just, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to think about that, even though, you have to solve it. It's one of those, like, it's easy to think you can kick the can down the road, but the longer you kick the can down the road, the worse you're just going to make the system over the long term. So it's an easy one to forget or try to push out, but it's also arguably the most important to get you to actually a fully scalable system.
So one other note on migrated data, you might find yourself the recipient of migrated data. You inherit a system that had data migrated years ago from all sorts of different source systems and things like that. And it's interesting to work with that, because you can see, another thing, people make, again, they assume positive intent. People make the best decisions they can at a given point in time. And you don't know what happened 3 years ago when that data was migrated and these systems were merged and all of that. Like, people did the best they can with the list of assumptions and information they had at that point in time. And who knows, they could have had a really hard deadline for go live that they needed to meet, and the company needed to meet for various reasons, for stakeholders and all sorts of things, right? So I think everyone does the best they can with the parameters they have at a point in time. That said, sometimes I look at the legacy data that was migrated, and so you can see it's like, this is not usable, right? And I've seen now how, like, years later, how it's how it's transitioned in the system to all the manual work that's had to go on. Or if you see records, I think, Jesse, you've probably seen this at your companies. I'm sure a lot of people have. They're like, oh, if you see a date prior to a certain year, like, don't trust it. And again, no one's trying to import bad data. They're doing the best they can, with the situation that they're given. But it just reinforces that if you can get it right, if you have the ability to do it, it's not something to go like, it'll be fine. It'll like, no, you really make sure if you can.
No, it's funny. I come across that a lot, obviously, on the data side, and it's easy to, I can't believe they did that. Why did they do that? And then when you actually are the one that's having to solve the migration thing, you get into it and you're like, okay, now I see. Because there's a point a lot of times where you have to make a decision, and at the time it feels like the best one, and maybe you're limited, either to your point, with time or even the information you have available to make a better decision. And I think that's another part of just learning as you go too, of what seemed like a good idea at the time. You after you do it, you see the pitfall, the other trickle down effects of it, and you're like, oh, okay, let me rethink how could I have done this better next time. And so, yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those that I'm more empathetic now then because when I used to just lead data teams, I would get so frustrated about it. But now that I've been on the system side and I'm responsible for those data migrations, I am substantially more empathetic, because it's definitely the thing that, oh man, at times it feels like, I mean, even right now, I feel like energy draining a little bit of having to think back on some of those projects. So, one thing that we haven't touched on, and we could spend the whole session on this, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but maybe just a couple comments around amendments or decom recom. It's the word that I know you and I have spent some time in. If you just had to highlight a couple of the key considerations behind it, um, and what you've seen, when thinking about solving the amendment process. Can you hit on just a few different pieces behind that?
Sure. Um, well, yeah, we could talk about the value of contract data for a long time, right? But
Yep.
a lot of it comes down to that. But before we go there, there's a policy consideration, I think, with amendments too. And I've worked in areas where, um, is what's the desire when we do an add-on sale, um, that's off, that's midterm. How do we want to treat it? Do we want to um, have the amendment term with the existing contract? Um, some environments want these midterm additional sales to like restart the clock. We're going to repaper you on everything, and we're going to start over. So no right or wrong. It's just understanding really what are we trying to achieve, in the absence of the ability to use system automation for amendments, which is awesome when it works and you've got the right data available to you and the right tools. Then you end up with you got multiple contracts, and maybe they all have different end dates. It's frustrating for the customer. Then that'll lead you down the co-terming path and designing a co-terming process for some customers. So think the data is critical. When you're looking at either implementing an amendment process or fixing it. Whether you're amending, renewing, can't talk enough about contract and subscription or install base data. Um, the policy considerations, like what does the business really want to achieve? Um, and also, if you're going to then look at your automated functionality that's available to you in the tool set that you have, um, I've experienced where we were using a custom object for contracts, and we couldn't, which basically stopped us dead in our tracks. So we had to implement, we had to back out a lot of functionality and rebuild just so we could get onto native functionality, so that then we could use native contracts, which then gave us the ability to do amendments and renewals and so forth and so on. So it's a consideration too. I think younger companies may not have the team on site that's thinking like, well, this won't work for us. We're going to do something custom here, custom there. Caution against that wherever you can, obviously, because you're gonna box yourself out of other functionality that's going to be really valuable to you down the road. You mentioned decom recom or decommission recommission briefly. I think every place I've been has a different method and policy for that. That's a whole topic. I think it's really one that needs to be led by finance, and how they need it to see the transactions flow, and then you can accommodate from there. But what I've seen work is doing using native functionality for an amendment to back out, essentially make it a $0 contract. I wanted to then have an amendment to add it back in, and there were reasons why it just didn't flow that way. So we came up with an alternative. But decommission recommission is what I was saying earlier of you've got to collaborate on solutions. That's absolutely one of them. I mean, you really need to understand what happens in the finance organization and accounting with decommissions and recommissions, because it touches so many different, it touches metrics. You don't want something to look at as churn, that it's not churn. The numbers have to tie out accurately at the end. We don't want to overstate or understate the net effect of the transactions, et cetera. So follow their lead, but come up with something that's, again, pragmatic in terms of the system that's going to, and also enable the users, because they may not. It's a process that sellers don't probably have to go through all that much. So how are you going to handle it organizationally? Is that a deal desk thing? Is that do you want sellers to initiate it? Is it RevOps? Is it how are you going to handle it? That's another key consideration as well.
Yeah, on that last point, it's funny. I was talking to somebody. We were working on a development project around this, and that was exactly what I said. As I said, look, you got to think in mind from the seller's perspective. Like, they're not like, it's easy from our view because we know the system really well of how to do this, but they're only doing this, maybe a few times a year. And so how do you make it as easy as possible? Or to your point, decide, what, we're not even going to have them do it. We're going to do it for them. But yeah, that it's an interesting consideration as you get into it. And I think when you think about, again, amendments, we literally could spend the entire time on amendments and still not get through the complexity of it. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It is that consideration of finance drives it, but also keeping in mind the limitations of the system and trying not to really deviate a whole lot from how that natively works within it.
Right. I mean, we all love our systems, right? But the data is so intertwined, and you start to play with it too much, you're gonna be breaking relationships and trying to form new ones, but they might be unreliable. It's really inadvisable. And I'm probably preaching to the choir to a lot of folks here. And again, we all do the best we can at this at a given point in time. But yeah, it's such transactional data that has to tie together. And why does it have to tie together? Because you're going to renew. If you ever want that renewal to get spun up again and be accurate, this data has to be, the relationships have to be solid between all the data points, and it's got to be accurate, so it's usable data going forward.
Yeah, it's funny you say that right now, and I just had a thought of like, oh, I need to actually, just something I did this week where I'm like, oh, that actually does affect renewals and how it is. So thank you for that reminder. This has been awesome. Again, we could have spent a ton of time on Quote to Cash. I've got one more thing I want to hit before we wrap up for the day, and that's celebrating wins. I think, it's really hard in the systems org and really RevOps in general, typically you're doing a good job because you don't hear a bunch of yelling, screaming, and shouting at you or complaining that the system went wrong. That's kind of like, we joke, but anytime we do a big release, it's like, you always expect some bugs, but if you don't hear a lot of, vocal thing, that actually is that's your sign of confetti, for lack of a better word. And so when you're thinking about, the culture that you are really big on instilling with your team, how do you celebrate those wins? How do you define success? How do you make your team feel like, when they're not getting necessarily great accolades, and it's not like sales where they're knocking down big, revenue wins. It's just a different thing. How are you creating that, fostering that environment within your team?
You bring up it's a definite real challenge on the system side of things, right? Crickets is a form of celebration, right? If it's quiet, but we're all human too, right? Even people in our roles, you want the positive affirmation. You want, someone to say, that went well. So, but users, a lot of the user community, it doesn't hit them that way. Sometimes it does, and you'll get a little bit of a, this really, whoever thought of this was, like that was brilliant, or this has made my life a lot easier. But you're right, you don't get a lot of that. So, but we are human, as I said. So I make sure that, not, for what it's worth, certainly what I think of it, we celebrate as a team. Our accomplishments, we share in each other's accomplishments. So I think it's, we're I make sure that they know that, I'm proud of them. My boss is proud of them, thinks it's a great job. If I can, their boss's boss. So, try to go up the chain too, because they may not hear from those folks very often. But if they know, it really means a lot to them to know, like, their work's recognized at that level. And that, we did all the right thing. And also there's a message there that they have our back too, because sometimes in this role, you don't necessarily, like I said, we're not the internal customer of anyone, right? Like, who has our back, but to know that, your leadership team, even executive leadership, thinks you did a great job, has your back, that carries a lot of weight. I don't think a lot of people in systems jobs, they're not ego driven. I certainly don't want to hire people who are overly ego driven. I mean, we all have emotions, don't get me wrong, but we're not there for the, hey, look at me, right? That's usually not the persona, but for them to feel, my goal is always for them to feel appreciated, accomplishments, we celebrate as a team, because also the other team members understand what it took to do this, get this project and for it to be successful. So I think that means a lot to them too, when their peers are saying, that awesome job, fantastic, where there's opportunities for like that more company level recognition, whether it's, club or what have you. I think those are really important opportunities as well. Yeah, so again, executive leadership, and as a team, making sure that they feel the love. If there's anything extra you can do, that's always a positive. But I think just the appreciation and knowing that, several layers above them, they get it, they understand, they think it's awesome. They think that those individuals did a phenomenal job. That means a ton.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining today. It was fun having you on. Always fun to talk through and geek out on some of these things. For those of you who are listening, feel free to check out Sylvia Price on LinkedIn, like her, follow her there. You also can like and follow the podcast. And again, thank you all for joining, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Sylvia, thanks for hanging on and sharing some of your story with us.
This is fun. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today to another episode of RevOps Revolution. Thanks for being a part of the revolution. Please tune in to learn more about different ways that we can help affect change within our companies. Thank you for joining us today on the revolution and being a part of it. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Feel free to join in on future episodes to learn more about how we can affect change within the industry. To the journey.